You brought up Wolf of Wall Street actually earlier. Like Wolf of Wall Street, this is such an interesting phenomenon to me because the first time I saw this film, I was like, oh, it's about like these guys who are greedy and like super, greedy or whatever. And then the second time I watched it, it's like, oh no, these guys are addicts. They're like addicted to the pursuit of money, wealth, and power and women, and they're pursuing it to fulfill this deep void that they feel inside.
So I'm going to ask you another impossible question that I can't answer myself, which is how do we fix the masculinity crisis?
Oh my God.
And a double-edged question, how do we fix it? And what is the source of it?
Oh my God.
You have 30 seconds.
So there's this... All right. There's this beautiful book by James Hollis called Under Saturn's Shadow. And then the subtitle is The Wounding and the Healing of Men. And that book contains the answer to your question.
The Wounding and the Healing of Men.
Yeah.
All right. That was under 30 seconds.
Boom. Defer to the experts.
Yes. There you go.
I can talk a little bit about it if you want, but it's a beautiful book that really truly answers that question.
You have 2 more seconds to talk about it.
Okay.
No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, I guess just a brief overview of as we end off, what is it in that book that stood out to you as this contains the answer? This is the way to go. So
historically speaking, he argues that historically speaking, indigenous cultures, men would have to go through these rites of passage. The bar mitzvah is actually a relatively contemporary version of a rite of passage that a man had to go through in order to transition from adolescent to adulthood. And in a rite of passage, inevitably there's wounding. There's wounding that happens. You have to, I don't know if I'm a huge fan of all the Viking shows that are on Netflix these days. And so
I just watched The Northman.
Okay.
Too.
Okay, nice. I haven't seen that one, but I've seen literally all the other ones.
I need to check out the other ones.
Yeah.
The Northman was really good. But rites of passage, Vikings, the whole folklore.
Yeah, the folklore, you see this in the Viking series where this young guy who's basically the prince of the king, he has to go off on his own in the tundra and survive on his own for the next 7 days. And once he's survived and proven himself to be a man, he comes back into the community and he's considered to be a part of the community. So historically speaking, this happened in indigenous cultures all around the world. You would have, a man would have the elders, the men who were the elders of that community, the tribal elders of that community, and they would
That's one of the wolves right now. Yeah, I'm gonna my rite of passage. My rite of passage after this podcast. I'm gonna go fight a pack of wolves outside my apartment.
There you go. Exactly. So the elders, the male elders would go with the young men and guide them into this rite of passage, and they would literally have to leave the community, which is a wounding. It's a severing from the community. They'd have to go out and do some harrowing thing that was life-threatening often, and the only examples of rites of passage that we have now is sports, the military, or prison for men. And in the absence of that, what happens when, according to this author, what happens when a man experiences this severing is a wound that has no way to transform itself. So in ancient times, if you will, in tribal cultures, a man was wounded by going through the rite of passage, and then he was brought back into the community. So the wounding served a purpose, right? The wounding had meaning. But in modernity, there aren't those same sort of containers in the way that a tribal community contained that experience for the men in the village. And so in the absence of that, you have excess, right? You have this desire on the part of men to go out and prove themselves and to go out and make a man of themselves, but it's sort of out of place. It's misplaced. And that's why you brought up Wolf of Wall Street actually earlier. Wolf of Wall Street, this is such an interesting phenomenon to me because the first time I saw this film, I was like, oh, it's about these guys who are greedy and super, greedy or whatever. And then the second time I watched it, it's oh no, these guys are addicts. They're addicted to the pursuit of money, wealth, and power and women, and they're pursuing it to fulfill this deep void that they feel inside. And so the question becomes like, how do we create containers so that men, especially young men, can have like older men to guide them, right? And I think that the Andrew Tate phenomenon he's followed by younger men for a reason, right? Can have older elders to guide them, like Mike Tyson, to guide to guide them, to
guide their fist into the face when they step out of line.
To like experience wounding, because wounding is a part of life, but to experience wounding that is then transformative. So like you go through a transformative process and there's a purpose behind the wounding. If there's no purpose behind the wounding, then it becomes a scarring, essentially. And it's given to excess, and then you reach for coping mechanisms like drugs and alcohol, and it's, sex with everyone, because you're trying to fill this void that historically had been filled by the community that you were a part of.